Hey everybody, it's B-Show Brian back with another edition of Horror Reanimated. This is probably going to be one of the first that go up newly on the YouTube channel. So if you're seeing me there on House of Horror, the Horror Channel, whatever it's called now, I don't remember. Thank you. I appreciate all the support. And we're going to do something pretty cool for Halloween this year. I have interviewed this person before. We did a deep dive on the Child's Play franchise, and it was an awesome conversation, and I wanted to have her back. And tonight we're going to talk about John Carpenter's Halloween 4 that Dennis Etchison had wrote the script for. And I wanted to get her take on it because she's a huge Halloween fan and because she's a writer and she probably comes at it from a different standpoint and picks up on nuanced things. So you may have seen her film commentaries and thought-provoking point of view in respected industry publications and websites like Fangoria, AV Club, Scream Horror Mag, Birth Movies Death, Crooked, Marquee, Rue Morgue, and Dread Central, to name more than a few. And you can find her work at AnyaWrites.com. She is at BookishPlinko on Twitter and Anya_Writes on Instagram. So boys and ghouls, give it up for the amazingly talented Anya Stanley. What's up, Anya?
Hello, thank you for having me. And thank you for the reminder that I need to update my author website because I have not put my new reviews up on there for a couple of months now. So thank you for that.
Very cool. No problem. So, like I said, last time we talked, it was about the Child's Play franchise. And just off the cuff, you mentioned reviewing scripts or reviewing movies. And I just kind of mentioned Halloween 4, sent it over to you. And here we are. It's 15 days or 16 days till Halloween, as the jingle would say. And we're talking the unmade Halloween 4.
Yeah. And you know what? I hadn't heard of this script at all before you had mentioned it to me. And
really?
I felt embarrassed. Yeah, I felt embarraed because I'm like, what kind of Halloween fan am I that I've never heard of it, that I have a bootleg copy of Halloween 6's producer's cut, and I don't have this, and I had never even heard of it. And so after licking my wounds for a little bit, I opened it up and read it, and it was an experience. It was something. And I'm looking forward to diving into it here.
Oh, it was something. That's not promising.
I mean, Halloween 4 is one of my least favorite sequels of the franchise, and so this was a welcome departure from that because it does get very different from the Halloween 4 that we got.
Okay. No, that's cool. When you said something, I was like, oh, great, she didn't like it. No, I don't gatekeep. I don't gatekeep as far as like, you didn't know about this. But I want to remind everyone, Taking Shape, and I don't have any sort of Amazon kickback or anything for this, but if you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, Taking Shape by Dustin McNeil and Travis Mullins actually goes through a lot of different behind the scenes stuff in making the films of the franchise. It's briefly mentioned here, but this script was actually kind of fan lore for a number of years, and small details would come out over time, and people would ask Dennis Etchison about it. I actually have a friend that befriended Dennis Etchison later in his life before he passed away, and I think he confirmed that this is legit, and it also was confirmed by some details that came out from Etchison himself, I think, before he passed away. So this has been verified as well as we can. I got this from, I think I subscribed to a horror newsletter, and when the guy launched it, at first he was giving these out. So if you want a copy, subscribe on YouTube and go check out Anna's, I almost said Anya, sorry. Go check out Anya's website, AnyaWrites.com. Send me a screen cap and I'll send you a legible copy. But is there anything you wanted to go over before I gave the brief summary and we just dig in?
I mean, I think that I listened to your last episode about Halloween 3, the novelization, and you had mentioned something that's pretty apt for this episode too, where you said that when we think of the horror films that we love, there's not always a lot of new ground to break, and with some of these franchises, we likely won't get any more movies for a while because of rights issues or whatever. And so now, even with new Halloween installments coming courtesy of Carpenter and David Gordon Green and Blumhouse Productions and what have you, it's still fascinating to see where the franchise could have gone. And so in that respect, Halloween 4 is a really, really interesting script.
Awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And some would probably argue should have gone, because I don't know, in reading this, I don't know if this would have been as accepted. But then again, Halloween was successful, but on a large or smaller scale than the films that had come before it, Halloween 4, that is. So it's just so weird to think about. And that's what this podcast is all about. For those of you tuning in for the first time, it's just looking at the what ifs and exploring them to whatever detail we want to get into. So, no, I appreciate that, and thanks for checking out the last one. But let's see. So to summarize the Halloween 4 story, first, how we got there. If my memory serves me correctly, of the lore of the series, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill didn't have much of an interest after Halloween 2, actually the original Halloween, to carry on the series. They were brought back to Halloween 2 due to litigation. Then Halloween 3 they agreed to do, as long as it was anthology style, and it went completely away from the original story. And when that didn't perform to everyone's expectations, it just kind of went on the back burner for a while. Everyone went their separate ways. So then in 1986, Canon Films approached John Carpenter and Deborah Hill about creating a Halloween 4. And I think they were either working on or had just released one of the Texas Chainsaw sequels at the same time, Canon Films. So they had Dennis Etchison, who had done the novelizations for Halloween 2 and 3, work up a script for Halloween 4 with Carpenter kind of guiding him. And it was rejected by Mustafa Akkad because it was too cerebral and needed a flesh and blood Michael Myers, which I've always heard that said, Anya, but technically Michael, even though he's a ghost, he is physically present in this film.
He is, and it's because at first I was thinking, okay, well, maybe this is just more about the figment of everyone's imaginations, because they kind of hint at that in the screenplay a little bit. But he kills people. He kills animals. He definitely takes up physical space, and not in the way that we would traditionally think of a ghost or even a poltergeist doing. So he's definitely there. I think there is something to the idea. I had looked around on a few message boards here and there, and I think there's something to the idea that the town itself and their fear sort of manifested Michael, in a sense. I really like that idea, and I like where it went with that. I like that they didn't just try to rehash 1 and 2, even though they did pay homage to it. They continued 1 and 2. They didn't quite phone it in.
Yeah, and there's actually a part, I don't want to give too much away, but I believe it's Lonnie Elam or his younger brother, their dog goes into the Myers house. They hear it yelp, he comes out, and later on chokes up two fingers. And it's like, when I first read that, I'm like, okay, now I'm lost, because it's supposed to be a ghost, and now he's missing fingers and interacting with the dog. So it was really bizarre, but I read this another time between like 2 or 3 days ago, and then I think I finished it up again last night. In this story, to describe Michael Myers, he's less a specter and more almost like, he reminds me of the Headless Horseman in the Tim Burton Sleepy Hollow. Like he's physically there. He's interacting with his surroundings, but he's still a ghost. Yeah, and the date on the screenplay that I had gotten here, the date is 1986, which is the same year of, what was it, part 4, Friday the 13th, Jason Lives. And then a year before Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors would come out. And so 2 of the big 3 that we consider like the slasher icons were in full swing, and they were icons at this point. And then Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which was the last one before this one, that had proved that, to audiences at least, Michael Myers is the franchise. And so this script is sort of an effort to put him in the same league as Jason Voorhees and Freddy, to the point where there is an actual scene that I don't know how much we can spoil, but there is an actual scene where there's a direct comparison made to Jason late in the story. And so when that scene comes up, spoil away. That's okay, a great scene.
Right.
It's kind of a nice little Easter egg.
Right. And so when that scene comes up, it seems a little try-hard at first. It's like, come on, you really wouldn't need to do that. But when you consider the time that this story was written in, it definitely makes sense that they would try to put him up there along with Jason, along with Freddy, maybe even along with the priest of Hellraiser. I don't know if he really counted as a slasher icon at the time, but there you have it.
Yeah, I don't know if mainstream fans would count him in the top 3, but I think horror I don't want to say in the top 3, but with those other ones. But I think
Yeah.
horror fans would. Pinhead or the priest, the high priest, whatever he's called, definitely one of the more iconic figures in horror of the 80s for sure.
Right. And yeah, actually, I don't want to spoil too much. I'm getting into the third act already, so I need to chill out.
And that's okay. That's okay. So just, if we forget, remind me. You can mention that again in a minute. But here's a short summary. So it's 10 years after Halloween and Halloween 2. Tommy and Lindsay, the kids Lori and Annie babysat, are outcasts in Haddonfield. They're in high school. Lindsay has no memory of Halloween 78, and Tommy remembers way too much. Halloween, any associated actions, celebrations, decorations, anything is banned within the Haddonfield city limits. The parents use the fear of Halloween and the boogeyman to control their kids to keep them in line. And more so out of the parents' own fear of things returning, their kids turning evil, following in the footsteps of Michael, the evil of the holiday itself. It's very, and I think I had done a synopsis review of the script before. Puritanical is how I kept thinking of it. It just reminded me of a repressed nature or a repressed society. So it wasn't just that they were using the boogeyman, but it was more so out of their own fear as well.
Mm-hmm. And the script does acknowledge the first 2 films. Sheriff Brackett is still there, like you said, and he says, my Annie was one of the victims in 78, and I saw her killer burn to the ground before the night is over. And so, there's a whole bunch of references to the first 2 films. Dr. Stern at Smith's Grove Sanitarium, she reveals that Dr. Loomis had died in 2, whereas in the Halloween 4 that we get, Dr. Loomis is very alive. He's got a couple of burns here and there, but he's very much alive. And that's interesting because in Halloween 4, in this screenplay that we have, there really is no Ahab to Myers' great white whale. There's really no one person that's obsessed with him and searching for him constantly and warning everybody about him. Not in the same way that the parents do. That's straight up fear, and it's not coming from an educated place like Dr. Loomis was from an educated place. He had worked with this kid ever since the beginning. He knew that this was pure unadulterated evil, whereas the parents were more like mythologizing him.
Yes, great point. In fact, I don't know why with Brackett and Hunt, Sheriff Brackett, Deputy Hunt, I got almost a Riggs and Murtaugh vibe. Like obviously much more serious and less comedic, but like you had Sheriff Brackett was much more like Officer Barbrader from South Park, like move along, there's nothing to see, everyone turn your head. And Deputy Hunt was like gun cocked, like ready to just blow somebody away.
He was, and he was very trigger happy, and so what happens to him later on is very satisfying. And it's interesting because the Halloween 4 that we have, Halloween 4 and 5, have their cops a little bit bumbly, a little bit goofy. There's sliding trombone music when they come on the scene. It's kind of goofy.
Yeah.
And so, and that's fine because, we've had that. That's a horror tradition, dumb cops who don't really know what they're doing. But in this one, the cops are competent, but a little, one is not obsessed enough, and the other one is too obsessed, but more trigger happy.
Yeah, and vengeful, yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's got a grudge.
Exactly. I mean, Brackett does kind of take Halloween Night seriously. There's a moment in this script where he switches from a 38 to a 44 sidearm when none of the other parents are looking. And it is kind of a far cry from the goofy cops of the Halloween 4 that we have. But that's old school, that tradition. We've had that for a while, since maybe The Last House on the Left was the first one, the first slasher movie to have, I don't even know if you count that as a slasher. One of the first horror movies to have, the really goofy cop that didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, I don't know. That might be the first one. You might be right.
I don't know. I'll have to take a look into that. That'll be fun.
That's all right. But yeah, so they're investigating strange happenings, clamping down on Halloween activities, but there's this phantom shape that kind of blows in and out like the wind. It doesn't seem like there's any rhyme or reason. I kept looking for triggers in the story, and I know he starts to manifest more and more as the parents and the tension in the film ratchets up, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I was looking for specific cues, and I missed them unless I just completely missed it and it went by me.
Yeah, I wasn't really seeing that either. I mean, near the end, he kind of focuses and hones in on Lindsay, but before that, it's kind of he just kind of walks around and kills people. He
Right.
just that's just all he does. And in a sense, I can understand that because he is Michael Myers. Outside of a sequel or two, there isn't really much of a driving motive for him beyond an obsession with Laurie Strode, and that seems intentional on John Carpenter's part, at least when he was working on it. Like a common gripe against Hitchcock's Psycho is that at the end, some of the medical experts explain Norman Bates' psychosis to the audience. There's too much comfort in that certainty, a lot of people would say. Carpenter didn't want you to have that safety net. And in fact, he had a doctor, Dr. Loomis, follow this guy around for 5 whole films. Well, it wasn't Carpenter's choice, but Dr. Loomis followed this guy around for 5 whole films, telling anyone who would listen, this dude is not open to reason or rehab. Behind those black eyes is straight up evil. And so there is a simplicity to Michael Myers to where he can stalk for no real reason. The scary part is that he is unstoppable and that he's ever present. And in this film, that he's superhuman.
Yeah, that's one thing I picked up, and that's why I wrote down in the summary that he kind of blows in and out like the wind, because the way I've heard Carpenter describe him, I think there was more of a motivation other than him just being evil, but I'll save that for another day. But at least in the beginning. But as a figure, he really was just, he tried to make him a mythic force of nature type thing, almost like a great white shark on land. I've heard people describe Michael Myers as. Or a tornado. Oh, Harrison Smith. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He's an independent filmmaker.
Yes.
He has a really good podcast called Cinema, Cynema, for anyone who's a film fan and wants to listen. It's definitely worth a listen. But he mentioned Michael Myers in the first film was like a tornado that touches down at Haddonfield, just happens to touch down there, and then he's gone, almost like a force of nature. So shout out to Harrison Smith, by the way. So this is really into high gear in this film. There's less human interaction other than just physically interacting with his space and scenery. So let's see, where do we want to go from here? Because I don't want to give some things away yet, but you were onto some good points. I was going to let you keep going and just kind of riff back and forth.
I thought that the opening sequence was really interesting, and it reminded me actually of Nightmare on Elm Street. Mrs. Wallace, the mother of Lindsay, who was the child being watched by Annie Brackett on the night he came home. She dreams that she arrives back at her house just after the murders, the night, like on the night in 1978. And in this dream, she can't reach her daughter no matter what she does. Her daughter, when she finally does get into her house, all of the furniture has like this marshmallow-like texture to it. She kind of sinks into it. And she finally finds her daughter, Lindsay, and Lindsay sort of opens in twain and kind of reveals the shape popping out like a daisy. And
that's a great way to describe it, man.
Popping out like a daisy?
Yeah.
Yeah. He chases her, he slashes with the knife, and as he's slashing, the furniture, which was previously soft like marshmallows, the furniture tears open and sprays this arterial blood, which flows out of the house and down the porch and down the street. And that's the opening. And it's a very far cry from the opening that we got for Halloween 4, which a lot of people genuinely love. This opening that just fully leans into the Halloween fall aesthetic. There's a sunset, there's pumpkins and trick-or-treaters and autumn leaves rustling in the wind. It's a very fall-like, very Halloween-like opening. And so this being what it is really interesting, and it's definitely saying we're not like the other films.
Yeah, and it's interesting. From what I've read, what little I've read of Dennis Etchison, and I've confirmed this on that Halloween 3 episode about the novelization. A friend of mine who got to know him got to read he has the manuscript for Halloween 3's novelization. Etchison had a very visual style of writing, and I know that goes without saying with most writers, but I just found myself, when I read this script for the first time, there's certain scenes that just stood out vividly in my mind, and I could see them taking place. The opening scene was one of them, because they describe when Lindsay's mom's in the house that, you mentioned it's marshmallowy, but it's almost like sticky, and what I got from it was that it was like the inside of a living organ. Like the house was almost alive. And then when he cut into the couch, that's the blood sprayed out, and then the blood came out through the door into the street. And then when they pulled back up the street, they described all the houses being lined up on the street like jack-o'-lanterns, and then almost like a row of teeth. There's something weird in there.
There was some kind of imagery that they used in there to make it seem like it was alive.
Exactly, yeah. The town was alive, the street was alive, and almost like about to be consumed by the evil of Michael Myers or the holiday itself. So, there's a lot of really good scenes in here. The pumpkin patch one we'll probably talk about later that come to mind too. Let's see, there was one thing, I don't know if it was just because it was a dream, but it seems like Mrs. Wallace's grudge goes back way before 1978. Because there's a part when she's in the car with her husband and she says, "I hate this time of year. There was a man in my neighborhood, old Mr. Hallendorf, who put things in his candy. One year he gave up popcorn balls with needles in them." And Mr. Wallace is like, "Jesus, every town's got a sicko." But it just seemed like Mrs. Wallace's grudge wasn't just because of what happened to her daughter, but like something about either she sensed something maternally, maybe I'm reading into that, about the holiday and the evil of the holiday or the spirit, what have you. But it just seemed like her grudge with Halloween went back even farther, unless I'm reading into that way too much.
Yeah, I'm wondering what that moment was about, where she talks about the needles and the candy and everything. Because if I'm remembering it correctly, in Halloween 2, there's a brief, very, very brief moment in the very beginning of it when you're coming into the hospital, and we sort of dully passed a kid who had bitten into an apple that had a razor blade in it, right?
Right.
Am I remembering that right?
Yeah,
okay, that is Halloween
right.
2, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that there definitely is sort of a mythologizing around the holiday itself too. And I'm not entirely sure why that was in there. I thought it was kind of cool, but I didn't understand why he put that in there.
Yeah, and I was trying to wonder, like, you have Charlie Bowles in Russellville. I think the cemetery keeper, the gravekeeper mentions to Loomis in the first one, over in Russellville, there's old Charlie Bowles. He took a hacksaw, like Michael Myers, this guy. Yeah. So, like, I don't know if it's just keeping continually to plant those seeds of the evil of the holiday, almost like the evil Myers represents is more of like this ethereal evil, this force of nature that exists out there, more so than just even the holiday itself, but tied into the mythology. And you see that later on when they talk about, what's her name, Dr. Stern, when she talks about Loomis and how she had some of the inmates believing that Michael was like an extension of an ancient Celtic god or of some sort. So I don't know. There's a lot of assumptions on my part, but like it just seemed like maybe they kept setting the seeds for the mythology of evil around the holiday, and that it goes back even farther than Michael Myers, and it will always exist. I don't know.
Now, as a massive Halloween 6 fan, I love this because in Halloween 6, in the producer's cut at least, the better version, if you're wondering which one you should watch, it's always the producer's cut. In Halloween 6, there is, they take on a whole cult angle. There is the Cult of Thorn, which sort of implies that half the town is in on this giant ancient druidic cult. I don't even know if druidic is a word, but druidic cult that uses Michael as a sort of conduit to pleasing some ancient gods. And he carries on this curse in the film. Anyway, this is about Halloween 4. But what Dr. Stern says in this screenplay is eventually Dr. Loomis, she kind of paints Loomis as a lunatic. And she says eventually he decided that the child was the incarnation of some pagan druid cult, the very essence of evil, something subhuman. And then she goes on to talk about Dr. Loomis's paranoia extending beyond Myers and maybe even infecting the whole town. The patients at Smith's Grove have begun to, like you said, treat Myers as some kind of dark god to be worshipped. And a few pages later, they actually do. They sacrifice a dead animal. I think it was a rabbit to this effigy of Michael Myers that they have hanging in the corner. Apparently, the staff isn't paying attention to shit, and they have a giant effigy of Michael Myers hanging in a dark corner in some room. and they have a sign underneath that says the Lord of the Dead. And so when I read this is fairly early in the script, I thought that that's the angle that they were going to go for, that the whole town would be in on something and that there would be some kind of evil presence within the town that takes over everybody. I thought that's where the paranoia of the parents were going too, but it doesn't quite work out that way. So I'm interested to see what you think about that part of it, about the Lord of the Dead effigy.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really cool. And when I first read it, it struck me as like not the inmates, the orderlies were in on it as well, because they kind of were letting these inmates do their thing.
Aha, that would make some more sense, yeah.
So, unless it's me just filling in plot holes, which could be possible, but have you talked to Daniel Farrens, who wrote Halloween 6?
I have met him briefly, and I was too starstruck to say anything about Halloween 6. So the short answer is no.
Okay. So the book Taking Shape that I just referenced, he goes into some detail about his intentions with the film. And I think that was his intent. And I think he said he was inspired in part by this and by the novelization for the original Halloween when he came up with the cult. And part of it was more like, instead of the cult using Michael like a tool, they're almost afraid of Michael, and the cult kind of worships him as if he's a god. So they're trying to appease him, but instead of Michael being the tool, he's kind of manipulating them. That was one of his intents in like an original draft that he had written. So it's like right in line with what you were thinking as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think that it's fascinating to see that before Halloween 6 came along, they were already tackling a sort of Michael Myers mythos and creating a whole plot around people in the town mythologizing him.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, not to get off track, but like when you look at franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you look at franchises like the Star Wars universe, everything starts with an original story with a few characters, and there are opportunities to either just keep retreading, which unfortunately horror, I mean, we love them, we watch the movies, but horror like retreads to death.
We love it. Yeah,
exactly. But there's also opportunities to expand the universe of that original story. And I don't know if Loomis has enough legs on him to have his own show or his own movie or like an extended Netflix series where like you follow little stories, like one is Loomis, maybe you have one about Jamie Lloyd and different characters, but like there are opportunities to expand the universe of the story. And I feel like this was starting to do that, and even to a different extent, Daniel Farrens' Halloween 6. Unfortunately, retreading and going for the cash grab was the word of the day.
Yeah, that's how it goes. But I did think it was interesting that Dennis Etchison did what he did with Tommy and Lindsay, especially because it's a complete 180 from the Tommy Doyle that we saw in Halloween 6. Tommy Doyle in Halloween 6 was wildly obsessed with Michael Myers and convinced that he was alive, even though no one else was convinced. And now in this screenplay, it's quite the opposite, where he's convinced that Michael Myers is dead and that we need to stop. We're only bringing him back by mythologizing him. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I thought you had more, and I didn't want to steamroll you. No, I didn't catch that, and I've read this twice now, but I didn't catch that till you just mentioned that. I had keyed in that he was a lot like the obsessed Tommy of Halloween 6, but I didn't even pick up on the fact that instead of Myers is still alive, he's still out there, he's the one saying he's dead, it's over with, let it go. Which, I mean, obviously that's a big part of it. I just didn't make the connection between the two on that side.
Yeah, and it's not until later on in the film that he finally, comes around, and he comes around in a really big way in a great scene. My favorite sequence of the whole screenplay. But we'll get into that part later.
Okay, yeah.
I am wondering. There's a part in the movie, in the story, where a store is broken into and a dog is killed, and the dog's blood is used to smear the words "He lives" on the wall of the store. I'm wondering, because I couldn't figure it out from reading that scene over and over again, who did that? Was that Michael sort of hyping himself up, or was that some of the teens? Because they had knocked over a store, but they didn't admit to killing the dog. And so I'm wondering, Michael definitely killed the dog because the dog Oh wait, that wasn't the same dog that ate his fingers.
It was
That was a
different.
different dog.
Different dog, yeah.
There was more than one dog in the movie. Yeah, someone had killed the dog and used the blood to smear "He lives" on the wall, and I'm wondering who that could have been, because it sounds kind of weird if Michael did that himself.
Yeah, it's weird. Did you get the feeling from this script that it was incomplete?
Yeah, I kind of got that feeling, and I wasn't sure if it seemed like maybe this was an earlier draft that we got. And that maybe some of this was kind of cleaned up a little bit, including that part, and maybe that final drive-in movie sequence might have been tightened up a little bit.
Yeah, because like I got that. Like, what there was, Mrs. Doyle is mentioned. She's very hellfire and brimstone, but it's after Mrs. Wallace is mentioned several times, and you never hear about Mrs. Doyle until the very end of the film, from what I remember. So
yeah,
it's almost as like, I don't know if they were changing mid-stride, and then there was some stuff at the end, like the pacing of the final scene. There were some things that seemed like, not to go too far ahead, but like after Robert Mundy goes to meet with Dr. Stern, they just end up at the final scene. And it's like, well, how they know they were there? It was like an aha moment for Brackett and Hunt. Well, how did they just know? So
yeah, it seemed like there was a lot more that needed to come together. And if this was the final draft, then I kind of see why maybe it didn't quite make it into production.
Right. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. So Brackett's trying to keep the peace. Hunt's gun crazy. Mrs. Wallace is trying to keep Lindsay's memories repressed. And I thought that was an important part of the very beginning. And it'll play into something that Tommy kind of keys Lindsay into in a little bit. But like, not only are the parents trying to keep Halloween out of the town, but Lindsay's mom is like praying that Tommy stays away because she doesn't even want Lindsay to remember anything about that night.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that I mean, it is kind of like a Footloose situation in the town, and they kind of do that to a degree in not so much in 4 and 5, but maybe in 6 they kind of do that.
In 6,
where people are just kind of reluctant to celebrate Halloween. It doesn't seem to be like outright banned or anything. But yeah, she definitely doesn't want Lindsay to remember too much, and that just seemed to be kind of like a loving maternal thing. I wasn't really sure if that was because there was something else that she didn't want her to remember or anything like that. It didn't seem like that was really what was going on, even though there was some strange stuff going on with one of the teachers at the school. Did you pick up on that?
Oh, yeah.
One of the teachers was creepy.
Yeah, it was the English teacher. And it's really weird with knowing what we know now and like the Me Too movement being so visible, I guess. Tip of the tongue, it's out front. I read an early version of a Beetlejuice script, and there was a lot of like weird comments about adults making passes at like 17-year-old girls. So I don't know if it was just like cachet to include creepy stuff like that in films at the time, or at least in screenplays. But like, yeah, it just was really weird. It almost seemed like it didn't go anywhere other than maybe as an excuse to show, I have the teacher's name written down somewhere, but maybe to show her as like a maternal role in Lindsay's life that maybe she didn't feel she had at home, because the one teacher did kind of step in and help her out. But I don't know. It seemed kind of out of place.
Yeah, it didn't really go anywhere, and I'm not sure why it was there, really. Beyond what you said, that she just didn't really have that sort of support at home, even though there was some kind of maternal support, but it was sort of smothering.
Yeah.
That was a really interesting, weird thing. I'm not sure, and the cameraman too. The cameraman had like used his camera and like filmed one of the high school students. I think it might have been Lindsay, or maybe it was someone else. But
was it Darcy? Was Darcy one?
It might have.
Was it the girl from the pumpkin patch?
Pumpkin patch, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was her.
He definitely filmed like a high school girl like with his camera, and like no one really made a big deal out of it. It was kind of like, really?
Yeah, like I said, I haven't read a ton of scripts from the 80s, but like it's funny that the 2 screenplays I've read both have weird stuff about adults making passes at teenage girls. It's really bizarre. Oh well, to live in the 80s, right? What a weird time.
What a time.
Yeah. So I made a note about the Phantom Myers here. There was a scene when it might have been Lonnie Elam or someone who threw a rock through the window of the house. it shows a pale, muscular hand reaches down, picks up the rock from the floor, carries it to the broken window, point of view watching the group of teenagers disappear up the street and car driving away. Now that's obviously a nod to the original Halloween when Laurie goes up to the porch and Michael watches her out the door. Then this says the hand grips the rock tighter and tighter. There's a breaking sound. The hand opens and the rock has split into pieces. So not only do we know Michael is back, but he's just split a rock with his bare hands. So we know
split a rock. Yeah.
Yes.
That was insane.
He's not
and
around.
Yeah, and it's oh gosh, they've done everything to Michael, haven't they? They just he can't die, basically. You can't kill the boogeyman. That's how it goes. About he has this superhuman strength. He squeezes a rock in one bare hand until it splits. Later in the movie, he loses a couple of fingers and they freaking regenerate. And that's nuts. But that all goes towards it. It just seems like Dennis Etchison was leaning further into that superhuman invincibility that Myers already seemed to have. If you look back on the franchise, they shot him, they blew his ass up, they shot him again with a whole firing squad in the Halloween 4 that we did get. They electrocuted him in which one was it? Am I thinking of Resurrection? I think Halloween Resurrection.
Yeah, Resurrection.
He got electrocuted. No, he didn't get an axe to the head, did he? Technically, that wasn't him. But all of these things that happened to him, you can't kill the boogeyman. That's what it comes down to. And so, I kind of get why that's in there. It just seems like it was going a little too far with the superhuman strength.
Yeah,
a little cartoonish.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm on the same page with you there. The one thing about the regenerating the fingers, the one thing that I was thinking of was that just keying into the fact that he's going to keep coming back, or the fingers are gone, but here he's back again. And again, maybe it was not subtle. Maybe it's a little too obvious to say that the evil never dies and the fear is going to keep bringing him back. But like you said, it got to be a little cartoonish, especially at the end, which we'll get to in just a minute. Let's see. There also was a lot of little scenes where, like you mentioned, the creepy teacher, when Lindsay heads up the stairs, there's a man in black with a pale masked face at the top, and the mom keeps out of the corner of her eye, maybe seeing something, maybe she doesn't. There's a lot of misdirection in the film as far as, are we really seeing Michael or are we not? Like, are our eyes playing tricks on us? So I also thought that was a little weird.
And that happens to a degree in the original film too, with Michael showing up behind a hedge, behind laundry, wherever he is, just because he's supposed to be this, I guess maybe this omnipresent figure who could be anywhere at any time, who could be right behind you. But in this movie, again, they lean into it even more to where he is, as they're watching him, he's moving through rows of cars with this superhuman speed while still kind of just walking at a normal pace. Like, it's really strange. And it just seems like Dennis Etchison took the elements that were already there in the first couple of films and took them to their almost illogical extreme.
Yeah, and from what I remember, I thought there was an interview he did where he said the writing process was he would write, and then he'd meet with Carpenter, and then they'd go over what he had, and Carpenter would give him like the high points, and then he'd go back and do more writing, and then he'd come back and they'd kind of counsel back and forth. So even though it's Etchison's writing, it was very much an extension of Carpenter. So that makes sense that they keep embellishing this, the ethereal nature of Michael Myers as a force of nature from the first film.
Right. And it makes sense. Because Michael's roots, they're in cosmic horror. He may not have tentacles, but his roots are in cosmic horror. Because what cosmic horror does, including Lovecraft, is you describe the monster. You show the monster if you got to do it, but you never, ever explain precisely what you're dealing with. And I know that that's contradictory for me because I'm a Halloween 6 fan, and all that movie does is explain where Michael Myers came from, but I don't care. I'm a bundle of arrogant contradictions.
Rules were made to be broken.
Right, exactly. But with Michael, throughout these films, there's this great big void where the religious or psychological explanation should be. And in that void is just some inhuman or superhuman man. And he's mean and he's somewhere nearby. And for one night a year, he is completely unstoppable. That's all you know, which really isn't anything at all, is it? It's really, you don't know much about him, which that's why he's a cosmic creature without having the tentacles that most people would think of as they relate to the cosmic horror.
That's a great way to put it. I've never thought of Michael as belonging to cosmic horror, but that makes perfect sense.
Yes, he's like one of the elder ones, one of the ancient ones.
That's, man, now my wheels are turning. Let's see. Well, I was just going to say something too on that. It's interesting to hear whenever John Carpenter is asked about Halloween and motivations and things, he always has like really nihilistic, nothing answers. And part of it seems like he's downplaying it because it was successful. But every time I hear people ask him about it, he's like, guys, it was nothing. It was a guy in a mask. Then he followed a girl and there's no explanation. And that was it. So it almost seems dismissive in a way. But then again, he's probably been asked the same questions for 40 years. So I'll cut him some slack.
Right. You get the same thing with George Romero talking about Night of the Living Dead and the significance of casting a black actor, Dwayne Jones, in the lead role. He just says, well, he just happened to be the best person to audition. You know, he just happened to be the best guy to come in for the role. And when you look back on it, you're like, no, it's a lot more than that. It matters more than that. And he totally downplays it. And I could see how Carpenter would do the exact same thing. But I mean, their stuff was reflective of a certain time, you know, and Carpenter and Craven, they were all part of this crop of directors kind of adjacent to the new Hollywood crew of auteurs like Scorsese and Coppola. Craven and Hooper and Carpenter, Romero, and even Cronenberg, they were putting in work at the time in the 70s to take full advantage of these looser creative restrictions after the production code ended in 1968. And so stuff like Halloween was the result of a greater ability to scare audiences. You have more in your toolkit to do so. And because of that, everyone, you know, like they say in the movie, I'm going to be corny here, everyone's entitled to one good scare. And Carpenter, he definitely crafted some good ones. And this was the 70s. This is the era of Vietnam, Kent State, Watergate, all of that stuff. Bad people were doing bad things and pretty much getting away with it on the evening news. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that actually, there's a part of the script, a big part of it that I wanted to bring up that ties into current times, but keep going.
Yeah, but all of these things called for sort of a likewise reflection on the big screen of bad people doing bad things with no rhyme or reason to it. Death is still going to come to your town. You can't stop it. And you're going to sit and watch it happen in color. Yeah,
and one way maybe it's because I'm from like middle America, small town, middle class, like town, everyone knew each other. One thing I always gleaned from Halloween, especially at that time, is in the 50s, you had like body horror, science fiction, atomic fears, things like that coming out of the Cold War. Not Cold War, but you know what I mean, the atomic age. Then in the 60s and the 70s, as you mentioned, with Vietnam and different things, you had Last House, you had The Hills Have Eyes, which I guess it's still atomic, but the fear was much less out there, and it was coming into your own backyard. So then by the time you see the horrors of Vietnam on the evening news, and you know, mom and dad are clutching their pearls because nothing bad ever happens. What's going on out there? Now the evil's in your own backyard now. You're seeing it, you're faced with it. And with the advent of cable and the proliferation of TV, all of that sort of became real and shattered this idyllic, like beaver cleaver veneer that people wanted to believe in, especially in small towns. And it still exists today. Like I moved out of Toledo and I'm in like a rural area, and there's people around here that they leave their cars unlocked at night. They leave their doors to their houses unlocked. And there's just a really weird sense of comfortable. I guess that's a weird way of putting it, but like people are too comfortable out here. It makes me nervous. Like,
yeah, I can't relate. We lock our doors out here. Yeah, we don't play around with that.
Like imagine moving out here, and again, I didn't live in the inner city, but I lived close to the city, and it was still suburbs, but close to an inner city section of town, like right on the cusp of it. So, and I went to school in the inner city. I went to high school in a Catholic school that was like right in Central City, Toledo. And when I moved out here with my wife and my kids, like all my neighbors were like, "Hi, how are you?" Like coming out of the house to greet me, and I felt like I was in a horror movie. I'm like, did I just move to Haddonfield? Like, what the fuck is going on? And it weirded me out for like the first month I was here because I was not used to my neighbors like rushing out to greet me and everything's great and cheery, and it just was weird. And
yeah,
my wife thought I was crazy because like all these people are being nice, but I immediately was struck with that feeling of like, wow, this is that setting. This is that feeling of comfort. And I don't want to say ignorance because it's not ignorance, but it's like just people that haven't been faced with those things, that don't fear the things that I think about that keeps me up at night necessarily, or they just don't want to admit that it exists in their own backyard. So yeah, it's interesting that this film took place at that time. It dealt with these things. And now here we are, Halloween 4, as we're talking about in 1986. The parents are causing all of this to happen because they're repressing this angst, and they're keeping the memory alive as Tommy's trying to tell everyone just to forget it and let it go.
Yeah, and there's I like what you said about the small towns because there's a lot going on within a few set pieces that occur that are very small town-esque. There's the pumpkin patch, and then there's the drive-in sequence, which I don't think I was trying to think back on kill sequences or big horror movie scenes that take place at either of those, and I couldn't come up with too many of them. As far as drive-ins, I think the only kill that I remember seeing that takes place at a drive-in is maybe Blood Rage. I think that's the only one.
I couldn't confirm. I've never seen Blood Rage.
Oh, there we go. So like it's yeah, I can't think of too many drive. I do remember a death in Friday the 13th Part 4 that does take place in front of a projector.
Yes.
There is that one kill. But this one is pretty cool. I don't know. I like the way that this one went down in Halloween 4's Etchison script.
Yeah. Now we'll get there in just a sec, because I think are we still trying to keep going through, or are we just going to keep riffing? I don't really care either way.
I don't mind riffing. That's fine.
Okay, but I'll go ahead because going to the end, because I know a lot of people probably haven't read this anyway. It takes place in, as you mentioned, like a drive-in theater, and the one thing I didn't get the first time I read it was the scope and the size of it.
Yeah.
There's at one point where they mention acres of cars. So think about, there's three screens playing at once, and acres of cars. So if you think about how big an acre is, a country acre, it would imagine a couple football fields if they're saying plural acres. I mean, and if you think about the amount of people that probably die in the finale of the film, Michael pretty much takes out half the town.
Yeah. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I actually had to read the drive-in series of scenes several times over because there's a moment where Lindsay is running from Michael, and somehow the cops are all surrounding Michael, and it's the logistics are really weird. So I had to go back and reread and realize that this is a way bigger drive-in theater than the couple of theaters that I had been to. Oh, yeah. And so I would have been interested to see how that played out on the big screen and the like you said, the massive scope of it, because a lot of Halloween's within the franchise, a lot of the kill sequences and a lot of the structure is pretty intimate. You only get a couple of people isolated here and there throughout the entire throughout the movie, and that's how most of the kills happen. A lot of them don't happen on this massive scale, and it reminded me of I don't know if you'd read Nick Antosca's script for Friday the 13th, the remake that they were going to do, and it eventually got trashed. It never happened. But in this script, the final set piece had Jason Voorhees going absolutely nuts on a bunch of cops that had surrounded him, and it was
I have read that. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
That was immediately what I thought of when I read this drive-in massacre scene. Because it was just so huge for one killer to just mow through all of these people so quickly, which also reminded me, if you want to go mainstream with it, of the scene with Darth Vader in Rogue One, where he's just mowing down all of these poor rebels who are just trying to pass a little card along. And he's going full Jason Voorhees on them, just not even breaking his stride. that's pretty much what Michael is doing. And it's I thought it was really cool where he used the drive-in as a massive set piece for a kill scene. It was something that I don't think I've seen to my recollection. I'm sure some horror fan is going to call me out. Well, actually, this happened in this movie, but I don't remember it, and I've had 2 glasses of wine, so we're working with what we got here.
Hey, that's all right. No, the only other movie I can remember even mentioning horror at a drive-in, well, I can't say that. The one that sticks out most, I should say, is Twister. Right before the big Twister hits, I think at the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. I think they're in a drive-in. I didn't mean to interrupt your sip.
No, you know what? It was yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I do believe. I think The Shining is playing in that scene too, right?
I think so. Yeah, the twins in the hallway.
Yeah. So we're coming full circle.
I think so. Yeah. But now the one thing I did want to mention, because you mentioned Michael at the beginning swelling in size, like the one thing I didn't get, and not to ruin or spoil things for you. Like I said, if you want to read the script, I have a copy if you want it. Check out her AnyaWrites.com and subscribe to the horror YouTube channel and send me a screen cap and I'll send it to you. But basically, Michael has a standoff with all the police, and when they fire upon him, he starts to like swell to mammoth proportions. So you wanted to mention that, and I cut you off earlier, so I'll let you take the floor.
Oh, no, it's fine. Okay, so yes, I'm going to talk about page 105 because you're going to read the script, you're going to the screenplay, you're going to have a good time with it, but the part that you're going to remember the most probably is page 105. And so we're going to start here where I'm just going to read straight up from it because that's all you really need to hear. Sheriff Brackett gets to the drive-in. There's cops all around in a little half circle at one point of the drive-in. Brackett says, "Put your guns down." And then Michael is standing there with Lindsay. Tommy Doyle shows up. He's standing on top of a truck with a 44 in his hand. And he says, "Not a chance." And okay, I'm going to read here now. And the shape looks up. He sees him, is distracted long enough for Lindsay to drop out of its arms. Then the shape starts for Tommy. Tommy pulls the trigger. The first shot hits the groin. The shape staggers. The second shot hits the head and blasts away part of the skull. The shape reels. Brackett, now! All the Warren County cops open fire with shotguns. The shape is nailed in the crossfire, twitching like a puppet between the cars. Then the shape starts to grow, as if feeding off the bullets and becoming stronger with each shot. The shape swells to 8, 10, 12 feet tall, raises its fists against the screen. As one of the shots hits metal, a car explodes. Then the next car, the next, row after row of cars going up like a zigzag pattern of firebombs. The drive-in and inferno. That is insane, and I would have loved to see that on the big screen. I don't know about you. I'm not sure how I feel about the shape swelling like a Ghostbusters bad guy.
Like the Marshmallow Man? Stay Puft Michael.
It does have kind of a choose the form of the destructor feel to it, but I'm not sure what you felt about it.
The only thing that I could say is it sounds like a really cool visual, and I know they pulled it off with some films in the 50s and even the 80s, but like, with the technology of 1988, it wasn't really like where it is today. I just have a feeling that with the budget they had, that it would have looked kind of cornball.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that they were able to do it with kind of like the Blob and stuff like that, but I'm not sure about with human-like figures, what they would have been able to pull off. And it probably would have looked pretty wonky. And Halloween 4 already has a couple of bad things going for it, like the mask and the a few of the characters that a lot of people don't like or didn't meet the end that they wanted them to meet. I think that the swelling, the shape swelling part of it might have hurt the film more than it would have helped it. But the rest of it, I mean, the car explosions, the cops just lighting him up. I mean, we got that in the Halloween 4 that we did get. There is a sequence where the cops do fire upon him. He falls down a mine. I think it was like a mine shaft or something like that. And then he comes back for the next film. And so, in a sense, we do get some of that, but it's a little crazier in this film. And I I'm really into the sequence as a whole, if apart from the shape swelling.
Yeah. It was it's like an action movie as opposed to a horror movie. It kind of kicked it up a notch.
And I like it. I do like it overall. I thought that the explosions are really cool, and the cops being blown back. It's great, especially when we don't really get too many films where the cops just blow a killer away. I mean, you get that here. You get that in the Halloween 4 we got. You get that in, I think it was Jason Goes to Hell does that too in the very beginning.
Yes, at the very beginning, yeah.
Beyond that, I'm kind of struggling to think of a posse of cops blowing away a slasher killer.
Yeah, it's almost like the movie Tombstone, where they hunt down the Red Sash gang or something, just start blowing away.
Yeah, I guess maybe that scene does kind of have a Western standoff to it too.
Yeah, which would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess the Attack of the 50-Foot Shape, for lack of a better term, would have been a little bit campy. But the rest of it, like, think about it just from an elemental standpoint, if I can, for a minute. I mean, this is schlocky horror stuff, but we're getting deep anyway. They've done everything to Michael conceivable. They've even burned him with fire, but now you have like giant fireballs, cars flying everywhere, gunfire blazing. It is force of nature versus force of nature in a way. And that was the only thing that I really had against this was A Nightmare on Elm Street. Nancy has the realization, hey, I'm not going to give you any more energy. I don't bow to the fear that I'm feeling. I'm done. You don't mean anything to me. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Freddy disappears. There's that trigger point there. Unless I missed it because it was subtle, I didn't really feel like there was that trigger point. So I kept thinking like, okay, they're blowing him away. He's getting stronger, and then he just disappears. Like what made him go away? I might have missed that. I don't know.
I didn't see what made him go away, and so what I read it as was something similar to Michael getting shot at the end of the first Halloween movie, falling off the balcony, and then just disappearing. And I feel like maybe they're kind of using the cosmic nature of Michael to their advantage and saying, you know what, we really don't have to explain that. He just disappears and he shows up later. And I'm pretty sure that most Halloween horror audiences would have just accepted that, because if you want to see a Michael Myers movie, you're going to buy the ticket and you're going to see it anyway. You don't really care how he comes back. We don't really care how most of our slashers come back. There are movies where a dog pisses on some ashes and it brings a killer back. We've had lightning rods bring a killer back. We've had, what was it? Which one? In Jason Takes Manhattan, isn't he revived underwater by like a power cable or something like that under the water?
Just like the opposite of Jaws 2. They drag a power cable and it gets electrocuted. Ugh.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter how they bring it back. They just, all that matters is that the killer is brought back for one last scare. And so, I think that we would have given them a mulligan on that one. That most audiences would have just kind of said, okay, yeah, sure. He disappears and then he comes back later. That's fine.
Well, what's interesting, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you always got to leave it open for the sequel.
Yeah, that's right. Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money. The other thing, too, that I didn't think of till just now is if the story is that the parents are continuing the evil of Michael Myers, they're allowing him to keep coming back, that he disappears in this hail of gunfire and explosions, he's not gone. He'll be back. And that's one reason Tommy takes Lindsay away, because, hey, let's get the hell out of here because they're never going to learn. This is going to keep happening, and let's get away. So I guess it does make sense. Yeah,
and it would have been interesting to see if they had, if later sequels would have followed Tommy and Lindsay out of Haddonfield, or if, Michael would have left Haddonfield for some reason and followed them, or if they would have leaned into another character like they did with Lonnie. Well, Lonnie doesn't pan out too well in this screenplay, but they do bring back, several smaller characters from the original films and the original first two films, and they do something with that. And so it would have been interesting to see where that would have gone and what they would have done with it, and who he would have chased after if Lindsay wasn't there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because there's a couple different things that happened in the film. One, someone says he came after the sister. Who was it? Was it Hunt? Maybe, I don't know. I can't think right now about who.
It was either Hunt or maybe the doctor, Dr. Stern. One of them.
That's what I'm thinking too. That he went after the Laurie Strode. He doesn't know she's gone. He can't find her, and he's not going to stop until he finds her. And that he's fixated on Lindsay instead.
And that is another point to bring up, is that Laurie Strode in this screenplay is acknowledged as Michael Myers' other sister.
Yes. Because
that gets very convoluted among the sequels too, whether or not she's a sister. There's a niece involved in later sequels. It gets hairy. And so it is interesting to know that in Halloween 4, at least, they do continue that as canon, that Laurie Strode is Michael Myers' other sister other than Judith Myers.
Yes. And the other thing, too, is in the Halloween 4 that was released, Laurie is said to have been dead, died in a car accident or something.
Yeah. They kill Laurie off and Loomis.
Yes. And here, well...
In this one. Well, no, in the opposite, actually.
Yes, it's the opposite. In this one, when Robert Mundy, who's another character that comes back from Halloween 2, he goes to the school to try to find some sort of connection, link, paper trail on Laurie, and whoever it is at the principal or the secretary just says, after she graduated, we have no idea what happened to her. There's no record of her. So it's not that she died, it's just that she's gone. And they kind of left it open.
Which is interesting, because if Michael Myers is so hell-bent on finding Laurie and he's so all-powerful, he should have been able to find her wherever she was at. But apparently his jurisdiction is Haddonfield. He can't leave. Maybe he just can't move beyond city limits. I don't know.
Well, yeah, because it's weird. They made mention, and it's kind of a subplot throughout the film, that this is happening at the Lost River Drive-In, and it's kind of against the wishes of the townspeople and even the sheriff's department. But they're doing it to compete with Hardin County and all these other surrounding areas around Haddonfield that show horror movies, that let people trick-or-treat, that have Halloween parties and celebrate. Michael has nothing to do with them. He's focusing on Haddonfield. And I know it ties in with the repression and things like that, but it is weird that that everyone else celebrates Halloween and Michael has no problem with them, but he comes back to Haddonfield. It was a little strange.
Yeah, it kind of lends credence to your idea that maybe this wasn't like a finished draft, and maybe this was kind of an earlier one that wasn't quite, not all the loose ends were tied up, and we were just kind of throwing a bunch of ideas at the wall there, seeing what sticks.
Now, you mentioned Dr. Stern, and for those, because most of you probably have not read the script, Robert Mundy, on a little subplot, as I mentioned, he's being urged by his news director to do a story on the 1978 killings to try to drum up some ratings. And at first, he's reluctant to do so until he pretty much is told, hey, you can win an award for this. So then he goes out on the trail for anything he can find. And he goes to Smith's Grove and he interviews the head of the psychological rehabilitation program, who is named Marion Stern. Now, another thing, I wasn't sure if they used Stern as a stand-in name or if it was going to be intended to be Marion Chambers. Is that her name?
Oh, maybe.
The nurse?
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, because she had talked about how she was sort of present, or that she was at least at the sanitarium, I think, the night that Michael escaped.
Right. And now if she took over for the main guy who got fired or lost his job, it would make sense that she was still there. But with the name Marion, I kind of keyed in on that. I didn't know if that was going to be used down the road or not, if it was just a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't know. I keyed in on the word Marion just because of Marion Crane from Psycho, who was played by Janet Leigh, who was Jamie Lee Curtis's mom. So I wasn't sure what it meant beyond that. But that's a really, really interesting nugget that I don't know. Maybe they did mean it as a stand-in, now that I think of it.
Yeah, but now you just changed my mind, because now I'm thinking of Janet Leigh as Dr. Stern.
That would have been interesting to see, too. Yeah. In 1987, 88? Yeah, that would have been interesting.
And she had just been in The Fog in, 1981 with John Carpenter? So not outside of the realm of possibility.
And that brings me to the other thing. There is a heavy, heavy reverence for John Carpenter in this screenplay. In addition to keeping in step with the first two films of the franchise, there's Carpenter references all over the place. And you had mentioned that Etchison was sort of consulting with Carpenter this whole time, right?
Yes, yes.
Like you'll have I think Assault on Precinct 13 plays on a TV at the Stop and Start Market.
Yeah.
The drive-in has Christine playing, and later The Fog is playing, and somehow a real fog seems to roll in, I guess. I'm not sure how that part worked out. It seemed like there was a lot of real fog in the scene where the fog was playing, even though this was, I don't know, this was rural America. It was just kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand. It's funny though. I walk out sometimes. My neighborhood, not to digress too much, it's like if you took a suburban neighborhood and dropped it in the middle of a cornfield. So like I'll walk out in the morning to walk my daughter to the bus stop, and there's this huge fog because there's a farm next to us, and it just I sometimes I'll just turn on the music as I drive to work and nerd out for a while, but. Yeah, what do you do? I'm a nerd that lives in the country. But going back to where was I at? Marion. Going back to Marion. What did you think about how she handled Loomis and how she explained Loomis, and also the tape that she showed Robert Monday? And again, for those of you who've not read the script, when he goes to ask her about Michael Myers and about everything that happened, she kind of puts it on Loomis, and she said, first of all, no one was there and saw him, Michael murder Judith. And then that society, circumstance, and Loomis's paranoia and him badgering Michael for 10 years and treating him as if he was subhuman are what led Michael to kind of break mentally and then escape and go kill people. So for her to put that on Loomis, I want to hear your take, because I have something I want to bring up in a minute, but I want to hear what you got out of that first.
I thought it was interesting because she essentially just treated Michael Myers like a patient and not like the incarnation of evil. She essentially said that she felt like Michael Myers might have been innocent of this crime, and that he was merely, now with all of these murders now, that he was merely stepping into a role that was already created for him. And so she was kind of on the side of, let's say, maybe like Tommy Doyle, where she felt like he's doing this because you guys are making it that way. You guys are sort of manifesting this in a sense. And so, and she does try to help him. She's not really an antagonist in the story. There is a point at during the drive-in massacre where she actually comes out and tries to talk Michael down from the ledge, so to speak. And she tries to kind of reach out her hand and say, come with me, come back to Smith's Grove. That's your home. That's where you need to be. Just come with me and we'll get you the help you need. And obviously, Michael isn't exactly one that you can talk to. So that doesn't work out. But yeah, she just treats him as a patient first and foremost. And it seems antagonistic in a sense because she's not quite taking him as seriously as the rest of the town and the rest of the audience is taking him. But I don't know, she's an interesting role. And I don't mind that she sort of did what she did to Loomis and kind of threw him under the bus there, because when you look back at all the films of the franchise, he was kind of a little loony, wasn't he? He got borderline obsessive, and they lean fully into that in Halloween 6, where he eventually, in the producer's cut at least, he gets the mark of Thorn, and he kind of becomes Michael's guardian in a sense. And so, yeah, it's just, it's very strange why we sort of normalize how obsessive Loomis really was. And you know, the only person who I've seen not do this was Rob Zombie. He said that Loomis was actually kind of a loon, and he didn't like the way that the character was originally portrayed, even in Incursion, and which is why McDowell, when he played Loomis in Rob Zombie's films, why he kind of takes it in a different direction, and he's not quite as obsessive as Donald Pleasance portrayed it. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and the leap of faith for Loomis being a heroic character is Michael is pure evil. If he's not evil, and if he's just someone who's, mentally ill, then you're right. He should be punished for whatever crimes and stuck in a psychiatric hospital or get therapy or whatever treatment is necessary for his conditions and for his crimes. But that's a tremendous leap of faith to make, and I know it's because it's an older film. It's been around for 40 plus years now, and it's so understated at this point because it's not fresh, and we just take it for granted that this is what it is. This is the story. But like, think back to 1978, seeing this movie, or even mid 90s, like when I saw the movie for the first time. It's like, okay, here's this guy. He's talking about how this killer isn't just like a mental patient. He is evil itself. That's a hell of a leap to make, especially from this crazy guy who's running around hunting him down, like you mentioned, Ahab, or even Van Helsing to Dracula. Like, this guy is crazy. How is he any different at face value, if you don't know him, than Reverend Jack Sayer that we would see in Halloween 4 that did come out?
Yeah, he's really not. And the only reason that we know not really to take her as seriously as most people would in Halloween 4 is because there are moments where we are clued into Michael's superhuman strength and to his evil. We see his freaking fingers grow back. We see see him, grow in stature exponentially when he's shot point blank with a shotgun. And so that kind of disqualifies the whole, maybe he just needs a good talking to,
Yeah. Let's take away his trucks and let's see if little Johnny is better. One thing I did want to mention to you, because I know we've jumped around a little bit, is the whole going back to the nature of the parents. There was a really cool part. I don't know what page it is. I just kind of took a screen cap, but it's the rats at the school and Tommy trying to reach Lindsay. And this is what ties in, because I know I told you 60 to 90 minutes. I'm trying to be respectful of your time. We're getting close.
No, this is a good part, though. It's a good part, though.
Yeah, nice to finish strong on, maybe. The rats.
What page is that on? I'm going to pull it up.
Let me see. I think I've got the script up still, but I can try to find it. Where is it? Scene 59, if that helps, I think. Okay. So it would be around page 34, 33, somewhere in there.
Okay, here we go. 34. Yeah, so he gets Lindsay to meet up with him.
Yes, so they're at school, and they've established now that they're both outcasts. People make fun of them, but Lindsay's mom tries to keep them away from each other, and he gets her to meet him in the lab, and he shows her this lab setup where these rats are getting shocked every 2 minutes, and his explanation is this, and I might have cut it up a little bit, so I apologize if you're following along, but he says they get an electric shock every 2 minutes, 24 hours a day. Then they get dissected. The thymus, the spleen, the lymph nodes, and of course the stomach. Tommy says, and again, I think this is where I cut it up a little bit, the adrenal cortex is enlarged. The lymphatic structures are shrunken. It's designed to control you by fear, to make you sick, then numb, so you don't feel anything. It could work on a whole town. That keeps you in your place and makes you give up. Then he makes a cutting motion across his throat. Close up on Lindsay, Tommy's voice fades as she starts to remember something. Tommy, the boogeyman is dead. We know that if you only, the boogeyman is dead. We know that if only you'll remember. Our parents don't believe it, but we don't have to be afraid anymore. Then again, there was another. So basically, this really stuck out with what's going on with the current news cycle right now. Mm-hmm. And this whole, it's every day. And my wife even watches Good Morning America. And it's bizarre. I'll be getting ready and it's like, so many people died and COVID and this and wildfires. By the way, here's the new pumpkin spice recipe for your pumpkin bread. It's so bizarre. It's, and I know it's a stretch to say we're living in a dystopia, but like just the constant stream of, and I think Marilyn Manson talked about it in Bowling for Columbine, this constant greed and, not greed, but this constant fear and consumption cycle. Like trying to keep people locked in, trying to keep people scared and compliant. It's just so bizarre, but this stuck out to me because it kind of fits with like the imagery that we're seeing in the news right now.
Yeah, because we have that 24-hour news cycle, and we've constantly got to have something being reported. And my parents are kind of part of this. They always, when as soon as they come home from work, the news comes on. There's it's in some way, shape, or form. If it's not MSNBC, it's CNN, and if it's not CNN, it's John Oliver. If it's not John Oliver, it's Bill Maher. It's something that where we are always hyper aware of the problems and the ills of the world. And we have been at a red alert level for the past 3 years,
Yeah.
And probably longer than that, especially if you're not as privileged as you and I are, as light-skinned, straight, cisgendered people. The alarm bells have probably been ringing for a lot longer than that. And so there's a weird exhaustion that comes with that. And that does reflect in some of the characters of Halloween 4. Especially in folks like Tommy, who are aware of what's going on, kind of, and they're aware of the constant barrage of what did you call it? The constant consumption of grief and alarm, or something like that.
Fear and consumption. It's a Marilyn Manson quote, so don't attribute that to me.
But yeah, something like that, where you could see it wearing on someone like Tommy, so much so that people consider him to be weird, and Mrs. Wallace doesn't want Lindsay to be anywhere near him. And even in Halloween 6, he's like that, where he's kind of a misfit and a loner and a weirdo, just because he's aware of what's going on.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I was trailing off there.
No, it's all right. Like, Alex Jones is batshit crazy, but every once in a while, he's right. He gets something, and maybe it's blind squirrel finds a nut, but like every once in a while, as crazy as he is, and I'm not an Alex Jones person, so don't worry, but
you're about to have people writing into your show.
No, I'm saying, like, every once in a while something happens, like with the Epstein Island. He was talking about that 10 years ago. Now, it doesn't help him that he was talking about all sorts of other crazy shit, so no one listened to him. But it almost becomes like Tommy is, in a way, almost like Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th. Like, his message is right. He's telling people to stay away because there's something that's weird, it's cursed, and just being there is going to be a problem and bring problems to them. But no one listens to him, and everyone disregards him because he's a loon.
Yeah. And in the Halloween films, Dr. Loomis is the doomsayer, the harbinger, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the one who warns everybody, who says, you're doomed if you go up there. He's basically that character. And absent of him in this movie, I guess the parents kind of fill that role, maybe, but it's a little bit different because it comes from an uninformed place.
Right.
It comes from a place of pure fear, and not like an educated, maybe like Dr. Fauci, like that would be something close to what Loomis was, where he's intimately aware of the threat and is just trying to warn anybody who will listen about it. Whereas, that the parents are more like, I don't know. I don't want to call them QAnon people, but I do think that they are.
That's a good connection. That's a good connection.
I mean, because technically they are right about Myers. So I didn't want to say. I don't want to compare them to the QAnon people who are a little out there about everything. They're very tinfoil hat-ish. But these parents, in a sense, they were right. Michael Myers was back. They did have good reason to kind of keep Halloween, maybe not keep Halloween away from the town, because Michael Myers, like you said, didn't have anything to do with that. He didn't care if people were carving jack-o'-lanterns. But they were just as frightened and ill-informed as maybe like what we would consider to be like QAnon people now. Or
like flat earthers. They're not informed, but they're still trying to alert everybody. It's like, really? There's so much crazy shit going on that we don't know about behind closed doors, and you think that, like, the earth is flat?
Yeah. And Alex Jones is definitely kind of a broken clock is right twice a day kind of guy.
Yeah, but I'll concede to that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But, like, there's even a point, you mentioned the parents being crazy. Like, there's a point where the teacher that is a maternal figure to Lindsay, she finds these Halloween decorations, and when she's meeting with the parents who are protesting, like the homecoming dance, I think it is, the teacher holds up the cardboard witch, skeleton, and black cat, and this character, Mrs. Nolan, exclaims, "The evil!" And it's like, it's a witch, a skeleton, and a black cat cardboard cutout. It's like they're so hysteric that even the most benign stuff is just setting them off.
Okay, so maybe the QAnon thing is actually like pretty on spot on, with people seeing like absolute doom in and destruction in the most benign things, like the word pizza.
Oh God, Pizzagate, yeah. So it's, that's why I really liked when you said QAnon. So don't shy away from that. It's this weird, and you mentioned like Fauci or Loomis. They're educated and they're an authority in their field, which is why we take the leap of faith that Mike, and because we see the proof. But even in 78 Halloween, we don't know much about Michael other than he was a kid, he killed his sister. And now we have this authority figure who is telling everyone, hey, he's more than just a man. He's evil on two legs. So we take that leap of faith with him. Whereas now here we have Tommy, who is crazy, but he's the voice of reason. And then you have all these authority figures, as in the parents, who are off their rockers, and there's this mass panic and hysteria going on. So it's a weird inversion of like that authority figure role being the voice of reason in a way.
Yeah, and I guess who you consider to be correct in the situation depends on whether you believe that in this screenplay Myers was really a ghost or not. Because if he was, then Tommy was right. But if he wasn't, if he was an actual flesh and blood, superhuman, super swollen man, then then the parents were right.
I agree. Let me see. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring up, or that that caught your attention before we dip out here?
I did want to say there is a great moment during the drive-in massacre where the Shape steps in front of a projector and his silhouette is superimposed over Jason Voorhees. And for a movie that would have likely come out 1987 or 1988, that's a really cool cross-pollination between slasher giants that we got way before Freddy versus Jason and before any of those slasher crossovers that we got. It was like I was saying earlier about Michael being this larger-than-life icon, and in any of the slasher franchises of the 80s, it's usually film 3 or 4 where that slasher is kind of given an iconic status. For Freddy, you could probably argue that the third film is probably the one that made him like the Freddy that we know him as today. For Jason, you could probably say that Friday the 13th Part 4 maybe would have been the one, because he got his mask in 3. Right. And so 4 was kind of the one where he was in that stride, and we got the structure and the cadence and the formula that we now know and we enjoy in all of the Friday the 13th films. But with Halloween, it's kind of weird because of Season of the Witch. It gets a little, there's a little spanner in the works there because that one didn't have Michael Myers in it. And so Part 4, at least in this screenplay, seemed like an attempt to juxtapose him with Jason, with Freddy, maybe with the priest from Hellraiser, but with slasher icons, and saying he is just as big as these other guys and he could probably hang with them. I thought it was a really interesting visual assertion.
No, it was cool to see him actually, and I think this scene, without giving away too much, there's a Friday the 13th movie playing, Jason's on screen, and the shape or the shadow of the shape is kind of superimposed on the screen through the shadow of the projector. So very, very cool. One last thing too is the very end, since we're wrapping this up, as Lindsay and Tommy kind of escape up a hill, the parents assume they've died with the explosion. Michael has pretty much slaughtered all the teenagers in town at this drive-in. And there's a really cool reveal scene with some plot holes, but when Lindsay finds these dead teenagers or whoever it is, There's a scene where Lindsay looks down. It says she stops to look down. It is as if the entire town of Haddonfield, with all of its dreams and nightmares, is going up in flames. And then when the smoke clears, there was something really cool that I didn't key on the first time I read it. As the last of the smoke blows away, we see that the center of the circle is empty. The shape is not there, only the charred remains of playground equipment. That's really symbolic because the parents have essentially caused the death and demise of all their children, and there's something really poetic in this image of these charred, ruined playground equipment pieces that are there, and probably a little bit more cerebral than just seeing a bunch of dead teenagers.
Right. It's a lot more that they had a hand in the massacre of their own children, definitely. They also ruined the childhoods of so many of the kids that were in Haddonfield because they weren't allowed to trick or treat. They weren't allowed to enjoy Halloween. And so there's a whole lost innocence, a whole generation of lost innocence in Haddonfield just because of some freaked out parents. I mean, because of Michael, but because of some freaked out parents too.
Right. No, 100%. Anything else that we missed that I missed that you wanted to bring up? Any notes that you made?
No, that's about it. I will say that in the Halloween 4 that we got, the film that we got, there is a sequence where Dr. Loomis is stranded for some reason. He starts hitchhiking. A preacher picks him up, and he starts talking on this very on-the-nose metaphorical conversation with the preacher. And the preacher says something along the lines of, "You can't kill damnation. That kind of evil won't die." And I think that Dennis Etchison still had that same mindset going into this script. This was a completely larger-than-life superhuman icon. He was making Michael Myers into an icon in this story, and I definitely appreciated it. I really wish I could have seen this on the big screen.
Me too. How do you think it would have fared with fans of the franchise?
I don't know because I'm not sure how well the effects would have done at the time. I know that the Halloween 4 that we did get went through some test screenings, and fans didn't like that it wasn't very gory. And so they had to add in gore. They had to add in that scene with Michael Myers taking out a guy's, like a paramedic's eyes out with his thumbs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's a couple more little shoehorned in scenes of gore like that. And this film, this screenplay has a ton of gore in it and explosions and a lot of the things that we kind of associate with 80s horror. So in that respect, I think that the third act would have satisfied a lot of fans. But in other respects, they kind of went a little too far with Michael, and I'm not sure that, like we had talked about before with the swelling and with his fingers regenerating, I'm not entirely sure that they would have gone for that at the time. I feel like that kind of superhuman, phantasmic sort of stuff was strictly Freddy Krueger's territory at the time.
Yeah, it did strike me a lot like it took a lot of cues from A Nightmare on Elm Street, so I don't know how it would have been received in that sense, or seen as maybe borrowing a bit too liberally from that. But it is interesting to kind of think about, people wanted Myers back, and he was back. Him being a physical ghost, I'm not a huge fan of ghost story horror movies because, like, what do you do to them? They're ethereal, they're not physical. Like, how do you fight back against them? There's always some like corny onk or some sort of like talisman. So yeah. In some way there's got to be, it's like some woo-woo sacramental type of shit, and that's fine. But like in a movie that was spawned from a slasher, from a physical knife killer, for lack of a better expression, I don't really know how it would fare, and I'm not a huge fan of like ethereal ghost stories. But in this sense, it almost gets around that by, like I said, making him more like the Headless Horseman, where he does interact with his surroundings. I do like him trying to make him more mythical, as you mentioned, and make him take it a step farther. Yeah, I don't know how it would have fared. I really don't.
I think that you were onto something when you mentioned the sort of talisman and the symbols, because they did try that in Halloween 6, and fans did not like it. People did not. I liked it, and I don't care if you don't like it, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the people listening. But
no, I get it. It's fine.
But it seemed like that wasn't doing it for fans. Now, Halloween 6 was a different time, and that was right before, I think, Scream came out, and so there was a whole shift in the way that slasher movies worked, and they became very meta, they became very self-aware, and so there might be other reasons why Halloween 6 didn't work out the way it did, but one of the reasons I do think is because of the talisman, because of the runes, because of the attempt to explain the nature of Michael Myers. I love it, but I totally get why people generally don't love it and why it doesn't really do well at the box office. And so this, like you said, it does kind of lean into that a little bit in this screenplay, so it might not have fared so well.
Yeah, and they kept it kind of nebulous too. I think nebulous enough to where it's purposefully not explained. Mm-hmm. And they even tried to limit that, with the theatrical cut of Halloween 6, where they cut a lot of that runic stuff and the stones and the ceremonial stuff out. I mean, there was even scenes where they barely showed the robes with the thorn symbol on them and cut around them for the reshoots and things like that when they did them.
Yeah.
So they tried to limit that as much as possible. But at the same time, who knows? Maybe people would have dug that more, but you're right. The times were changing and self-referential horror was in. And unfortunately, runes and thorn were out. If that was all you had to bring up, overall, do you like it, dislike? What'd you think?
Overall, I like it. I like there was a couple of beats here and there that, a couple of loose ends that needed to be tied up. There was the swelling thing that I didn't dig at all, but beyond that, there were some really great set pieces. It took the franchise in a different direction than I thought it would, and it still kind of stayed true to the original too. I really dug what Etchison did with it.
Very cool. Do you have anything you want to plug?
No, nothing. You plugged everything for me. No, I am on Twitter at bookishplinko. That's where you can find me the most. And my website that I need to update is anyawrites.com. That's ANYA rights.com.
Are you working on anything right now that you want to hint to, or?
The next print issue of the newly revived Fangoria magazine will have my column in it. I now have a gender-based column called Rated XXXY in it. And so in every print issue, I will be tackling horror films from a gender-based perspective, which is a lot of fun because a lot of horror films hate women. So it's fun to to dissect and to look at that and say how I love these films anyway. So, the next issue of Fangoria, which you can find at fangoria.com, you can subscribe to the magazine and read my words.
I hope so. I do. It's funny. Sometimes you'll get me. Like, I'll see a headline and I'm like, what? Come on. And then I'll read it and I'm like, damn it, she got me. Because it's almost like you hook me in with a good headline and I read it to be like, what's this all about? But then you're talented and you make really good sense. And it's like, shit. And that, again, that's why I don't like to do a ton of interviews and collaborations, but I really like to get other people's perspectives, and some of the stuff you've written really, I try to keep a tight circle. And some of the stuff that I've read that you've written is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a point of view that I don't see often, and it's good to get your insight because I know you think completely differently in some cases than I do about some of this stuff. And like in mid-conversation, I was changing my mind about things that I'd made my mind up on. So don't ever judge a book by its cover, but go and check out Anya and every iteration and all of her articles. And congratulations on the Fangoria stuff. I know that's a big deal too.
A huge deal for me. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Anytime. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, that was Anya Stanley. She is a freelance horror writer. I ran down at the top of the show all the different places that you can find her work. Oh, fuck it, I'll do it again. You can find her thought-provoking point of view and Fangoria, AV Club, Scream Horror Mag, Birth Movies Death, Crooked Marquee, Rue Morgue, and Dread Central. You can find her work at AnyaWrites.com. She is at Bookish Plinko on Twitter and Anya_Writes on Instagram. So thanks everybody for joining us. Make sure you subscribe. You go check out Anya. If you want a legible PDF copy of the Halloween 4 script by Dennis Etchison, drop me a note. But also, I want to make sure you go follow Anya and patronize her work and give her a shout and a follow for doing so, for giving her time and her insight. It was really cool to go through. I do a lot of these shows by myself. It gets boring, and I don't want to feel like I'm talking at myself for too long. So it keeps me sane.